Would you believe me if I told you a single kick changed an entire town? It wasn't just any kick. It was a boot slammed into the ribs of an old man right in front of the farmer's market at 7:38 a.m. on a quiet Thursday in Oak Ridge. No sirens, no arguments, just one loud thud, and suddenly the whole place fell silent. Walter Henderson, 72, bent over in pain next to his cart of empty soda cans. Never saw it coming. He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't yelling. He had just slipped on spilled fish water from the butcher's stall. Yet the young deputy, Officer Kyle Brody, known around town for his temper, had no hesitation. Back again, old man, he spat, before swinging his boot like he was putting down a threat. Walter collapsed, gasping blood at the corner of his mouth, as boots shuffled away and folks turned their eyes to potatoes and pork ribs. No one moved, no one dared, not even Mrs. Elkins from the spice stall, who'd known Walter since the Carter administration. It should have ended there, like it always did. A poor man gets humiliated. A crowd watches in cowardice. The town moves on. But this time, the silence didn't last long. From a black Lincoln parked across the street, a woman stepped out. She wore ivory, not flashy, not expensive looking, but it was the way she moved that froze the street. She walked like she had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. Everyone just looked. She knelt beside Walter, lifted his head gently, brushed dust off his cheek. "Does it hurt here?" she asked, voice steady and low, like she'd done this before for someone she loved. Walter nodded. He recognized those eyes, sharp but kind. And then, she stood. She turned to the deputy, still puffed with false authority. "You don't have the right to do that," she said, clear as morning church bells. He scoffed. "And who are you, lady?" "I'm the one about to make a phone call," she replied. That's when something shifted in the air. No yelling, no threats, just the sound of her dialing, and the market held its breath. Then came the deputy's ringtone. He checked the screen and froze. The color drained from his face. His hand shook as he answered. "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand. I'll step down right away." He didn't explain. He didn't argue. He just walked off, like a man who knew the sun had set on his last ounce of power. The woman didn't gloat. She didn't even watch him leave. She only turned back to Walter, helped him to a bench, and waited beside him like a daughter would. People whispered, "Who is she? Was that the sheriff on the line? Did you see his face?" That morning, something changed in Oak Ridge. Not just because an officer got called out, but because, for the first time in years, someone had stood up, not with fists, not with fury, but with quiet, unshakable dignity. And she did it for a man everyone else had already stopped seeing. But the question lingered. Who was she? And why, after all these years, did she come back? The answers would shake this town more than any kick ever could. Now, let me take you to where this really begins. Not at the market, but on the back roads of memory, where a woman named Rachel Grant had buried her past, and would soon have to dig it back up. "Gives Chayon MDT, sang fun to the woman. In white, nu bun muon ti vit tip fun tu. Cha cnn, noi vit tip fun tu. Ti kung ko the tach li thoi. To kutch bun ling ting. Hoek chen dsu thejion, theo dieng. Video YouTube. She didn't come to be seen. Rachel Grant hadn't stepped foot in Oak Ridge for over 30 years. And yet, when she walked through the crowd that morning, the entire town seemed to pause. She didn't wear makeup, no bodyguards, just a white coat, a silver bracelet, and a silence that made people lean in. Nobody recognized her, not the bakery owner she once helped sweep floors with as a teen, not the school janitor who used to smile at her every morning. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Rachel wasn't there for recognition. She was there because she had seen the video. The footage had only circulated in one private circle. A security cam clipped from the gas station facing the market. No sound. Number edits, just 5 seconds of pure disgrace. A cop assaulting a frail elderly man, and the entire town watching like statues. She watched it 12 times. The 13th time, she whispered, "It's him. Walter Henderson, her father. The man who once kicked her out of his trailer, for token to fancy. The man who disappeared into his shame, into his bottle, into a silence thicker than tar. Rachel had built her life as far from him as possible. While Walter withered in Oak Ridge, she carved out an empire in Dallas. First as a nurse, then a wellness entrepreneur. Finally, the founder of a cosmetic health network spanning 14 states. She kept her last name off every press release. never showed her hometown on any podcast. But that video, that changed everything. It wasn't just about him being kicked. It was about the fact that no one helped him. That even she, with all her money, her reach, her supposed power, had let it come to this. She flew in that night. No security. No PR team. Just her. The next morning, she sat in her car across the market, watching how people avoided her father. Watching the way he limped, the way he still tried to pick up his cans. Watching the world treat him as invisible, until it was too much, and that's when she stepped out. That's when Oak Ridge saw her, the woman in white. And after everything, she hadn't even said her name. Not to the officer. Not to the crowd. But the phone call, that wasn't random. She'd spent the last 5 years investing quietly in rural sheriff elections. Criminal justice reform wasn't just a cause for Rachel. It was atonement. She knew the game. Knew how to play it. Knew exactly who to call. And how one name, her name spoken into the right ear, could level a man's career in seconds. And yet, after the officer left, Rachel didn't linger. She didn't stay to make speeches. She didn't post about it. She just slipped back into her car like a ghost who'd come to haunt the past, then vanish. But this time, the past wouldn't stay buried, because word spread faster than wildfire. Someone whispered she was the niece of a retired federal judge. Someone else said she was in real estate. A teen on TikTok swore she was a celebrity doing a social experiment. But only one person knew the truth. Walter, lying on his porch later that night, ice pack pressed to his ribs, he whispered to no one, "Rachel, is that you?" He wasn't sure. Age had taken his eyes. Pride had taken his courage. But something in the way she touched his shoulder, gentle, unshaken, told him maybe, just maybe. And while Oak Ridge buzzed with questions, Rachel drove toward a small, rusted trailer on the edge of town. The same one with the peeling Henderson nameplate. The same porch she used to sit on with a broken jump rope and a book nobody cared. She was reading. She didn't knock. She just parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment, hands trembling. Because the next step wasn't about fixing a broken town. It was about facing a broken man. And somewhere in that silence, as frogs began their song and the market closed for the night, a single porch light flickered on. What would she say? What would he remember? Sometimes, the hardest door to open isn't locked. It's just never been touched in decades. And that was the door Rachel was about to walk through. Now, if you think this story is about a woman saving her father, wait until you see what he's been saving for her. Because in the next chapter, an old letter, a bowl of beans, and a name she'd long buried will change everything. 3 hours after the incident at the market, Oak Ridge looked unchanged. The sun still hung low over the cedar trees. Kids still biked past the library. The church bell still rang at noon. But if you looked closely, something in the town's rhythm had shifted like a note slightly off-key in an old country song. The officer was gone. Not suspended, not placed under review. Gone. His cruiser disappeared from the parking lot. His name was scraped off the bulletin board in town hall. And those who dared to ask why were met with 2 words. She called. That was all anyone needed to hear. Because in Oak Ridge, no one, not even the mayor, had that kind of pull. The whispers multiplied. At Darlene's diner, old-timers put down their coffee and spoke in low tones. At the gas station, the clerk turned down the radio to hear more clearly. At the church, even Pastor Owens paused during choir practice. Who is this woman? They asked. Why did she defend him? What else is she here for? But while the town spun its theories, a storm was quietly brewing. Not in the sky, but behind the doors of the county committee building. Inside, the polished table in room 4B bore no donuts that day, no small talk, just a single laptop, and 5 people leaning forward, like conspirators in a Cold War film. The mayor. The sheriff. The communications director. And 2 members of the ethics council, neither of whom had ever actually read their own charter in full. They weren't asking why the officer was pulled. They were asking how to control what came next. Someone had already leaked a screenshot of the video. Someone else had tagged Oak Ridge PD in a fiery Facebook post with 312 shares in under 2 hours. The fire was lit, and they knew it. But instead of asking how they'd failed, they asked, how do we spin this? They pulled up Walter's file. 1 DUI in 1991. 1 noise complaint in 1997. A brief stint in rehab. Never completed. It was nothing, but it was something. Could we say he's mentally unstable? Someone asked. Can we release this without it looking like slander? Another said, they spoke about him like he wasn't a man, like he was a tool, a pawn, a headline to shape. That's the thing about people in power. When the mirror cracks, they don't fix their face, they smash the glass. But while they crafted statements and planned press angles, Rachel was silent. No press conference, no interviews, not even a tweet. She had disappeared again, like a ghost who showed up to fix a flickering light, then vanished into the attic of memory. And that quiet, that eerie calm, it unsettled them more than any angry mob could. Because when the rich get loud, you know what they want. But when the rich go quiet, that's when you should worry. Meanwhile, Walter sat on his porch, staring at the same gravel path he used to sweep. For his daughter, his ribs hurt. His pride hurt more. But what haunted him most was the look in her eyes. Not pity, not anger, recognition. She knew him, and he wasn't sure he deserved that. The town could feel it. A reckoning was coming. But they didn't know where from. Not from courtrooms, not from protests. It would come from stories from kitchen tables, from Facebook posts, from whispered truths, suddenly spoken aloud. And as night fell, as the temperature dipped and the windows darkened, a printer somewhere inside the county building spat out a drafted statement. Due to ongoing investigation, we urge the public to refrain from speculation. We remain committed to the safety and dignity of all citizens. But in the bottom drawer of that office, in a yellowing file no one had dared open in years, lay a photo. Walter, Rachel, a front porch, smiling, and beside it, a letter she wrote at age 11. They had no idea it still existed, but Walter did. And he knew, when the time came, he wouldn't just speak, he would read it. Because this time, the truth wouldn't come from those in suits. It would come from the broken, who never forgot what it meant to love someone, even when the world had stopped looking. And just before sunrise, Rachel stood in her childhood room, brushing her fingers over an old bookshelf, still filled with dust and guilt. Tomorrow, she'd return, not to fight, but to finish what her silence had started. Because in Oak Ridge, storms don't come with thunder, they come with memory. And memory, when told right, can shatter anything built on lies. Now, in the next part of this story, you'll see just how powerful a quiet man with a forgotten letter can be, and why the world should never underestimate the sound of regret turned into truth. The doors were old oak, thick, heavy, built not to keep the cold out, but to keep the truth in. Room for B had no windows, just low fluorescent lights and a round table where too many decisions had been made in too few minutes. The people sitting around it today weren't strangers. They'd been in each other's Christmas cards. Their kids played softball together. They went to the same 4th of July potlucks. But this wasn't a picnic. This was damage control. Buyer Leland adjusted his tie for the 3rd time. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked toward the door with every footstep outside. He hadn't eaten all day, not out of guilt, but out of calculation. He needed to be sharp. The sheriff leaned back, arms crossed, clearly fuming. This should have never gone public. The communications director, younger than everyone in the room by 2 decades, responded flatly, it didn't. Until someone leaked the video. And now, we've got a town that smells blood. No one mentioned Rachel's name. Not out loud, but everyone felt it. Because when a ghost from the town's past returns with enough quiet power to pull an officer off duty with one call, that's not a citizen. That's a threat. Leland tapped the table twice. Let's get ahead of it. The old man. Walter, his record's messy, right? The sheriff opened a manila folder like it was a weapon. He's got enough to stir doubt. Rehab a few drunk-hand disorders. He used to work the mill, but was let go. We can paint him as unstable. Then we lean into that. Leland nodded. Say the officer was trying to de-escalate. That he tripped. That Walter was yelling incoherently. The room nodded, half reluctantly, half relieved. No. One asked whether it was true, because in Oak Ridge, behind closed doors, truth was just a matter of which pen signed the statement. Public sentiment. Someone asked. The young woman from Combs pulled up Facebook on her laptop. Mixed. The older crowd is quiet. But the younger folks, they're posting. They've clipped the video. They're tagging journalists. One post's already at 15,000 views. The sheriff muttered, "Goddamn tick." Then came the worst part. Silence. The kind where people start realizing they've crossed a line. But it's too late to go back, so they doubled down. We need a press release before morning, Leland said. We stay vague. We urge calm. We spin it as isolated. But what about the woman? Someone asked. And for the first time, no one answered. Because here's what they didn't want to admit. They didn't know anything about her. Not her last name. Not her background. Not even where she was staying. All they knew was that she had power. The kind they couldn't measure, couldn't intimidate, couldn't control. And in a town like Oak Ridge, that kind of unknown was more dangerous than a riot. Meanwhile, outside that room, miles away, Walter sat at his porch table, a worn letter spread in front of him. His hands shook as he reread it, each word a thread pulling him further back in time. Dear Daddy, I don't like school anymore. They said we're poor. But I told them you're just saving up for something big. He never mailed it back. Then, didn't think it mattered. Now, it was the only thing that did. In another part of town, Rachel sat in her rental car, outside the old grocery store, where she used to steal glances at her dad through the glass door, hoping he'd wave, hoping he'd smile, but he never did. And yet today, when she lifted him from the ground, he didn't push her away. That meant something. Tomorrow, the town would wake up to headlines, statements, denials. But none of that would matter. Because the real truth, it wasn't in files. It wasn't in news feeds. It was in hands that once hurt, learning how to hold again. And it was in letters never sent. Now finally, being read. What happens next won't come from the people behind closed doors. It'll come from someone who's been quiet too long, finally deciding to speak. And when he does, Oak Ridge will have to choose. Protect the lie, or honor the man who lived through it. Coming up next, a dinner table, a bowl of beans, and a story that only a daughter could tell, and a father might finally be ready to hear. Rachel didn't stay for the cameras, because there were none. No one in Oak Ridge had the nerve to follow her with a phone. No reporters had shown up, not yet. And even if they had, they wouldn't have seen what she came back for. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to look. That night, she drove through her old street slowly, engine humming low, like a memory being whispered. Houses looked smaller now. Paint peeled a little more. But the smells hadn't changed. Magnolia and oil. Smoke from someone still burning pecan wood. Laundry soap lingering from a porch where an old woman still folded towels alone. She stopped outside the trailer she'd once sworn never to see again. Henderson, carved in rusted metal. Same screen door with the bullet hole in the corner. Same wind chime that hadn't chimed right since '92. She didn't knock. She just opened the door. Let it creak. Stepped inside. And breathed. Nothing said her name, but everything remembered her. The recliner where he used to fall asleep with the TV on. The faded wallpaper with stars she drew in crayon, half scrubbed but still there. And on the counter, a jar of beans soaking in water. She blinked. She hadn't told anyone, not even her husband. But when she was 6, her favorite meal wasn't cake or candy. It was her dad's sweet butter beans, soft, creamy, with smoked ham and a splash of vinegar, he used to say, only for smart girls who finished their books. She used to finish too, just to get seconds. That night, he was cooking them again. She stepped into the kitchen, like a ghost returning to her own haunting. Walter didn't flinch. He didn't greet her, didn't ask why she came. He just stirred the pot and said, "You still take it with a little sugar, don't you?" Rachel froze. Not because he remembered, but because that was the first complete sentence he'd said to her in 30 years. She nodded once, sat at the corner of the table. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood, still nicked from where she'd once carved her name with a fork. Only the R still visible. He ladled beans into a chipped bowl, slid it across without looking, and for the first time in decades, they ate together, no words. Just spoons, scraping ceramic, and the hum of an old fridge that never quite died. Then he cleared his throat, stood up, and walked into the back room. Rachel thought he'd disappear, like he always did, but he returned with a folded paper, yellowed with time. He placed it beside her bowl. It was her handwriting. She unfolded it slowly. "Dear Daddy, I miss you. When I get rich, I'll buy you a new chair. And we can watch cartoons and not cry anymore." She stared at it, then at him. "I found it after you left," he said. "Never could throw it away." Rachel tried to speak, but her voice caught, somewhere between her ribs and the memory of that night. The night she left. The night he said, "Don't come back till you stop acting like your mama." And she never did. Until now, she wanted to ask why. Why he drank, why he yelled, why he let go. But instead, she said something simpler. "I bought the chair," she whispered. "It's waiting at the clinic in Dallas." Walter chuckled. A dry, cracked sound, but real. "I don't need a chair," he said. "I just needed the letter." Rachel placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind rustled the chimes. They still didn't sound right. But in that kitchen, with a bowl of beans, a letter, and the soft silence of forgiveness, something old broke open. Not like glass, more like earth. A place where something buried long ago might still grow. Because tomorrow, Rachel wasn't just going to confront the town. She was going to stand beside the man who once failed her, and now was trying to be more than the man they all thought he was. Coming up next, a single letter, a quiet storm, and a town about to hear the story it spent years trying to forget, told not through outrage, but through a daughter's voice, and a father's truth. The beans were still warm, even as the clock ticked past midnight and the air outside turned cold. The kitchen stayed wrapped in a kind of stillness. Not silence, exactly, but something heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. Rachel didn't eat much, a few spoonfuls, enough to remember. Walter, on the other hand, ate slow and steady, chewing like every bite mattered. Like he was tasting not just the beans, but every year he'd lost between then and now. He didn't say much after handing her the letter, but he didn't need to, because that letter, written in a child's uneven handwriting, sealed in a trembling heart, and hidden in a drawer for 3 decades, said everything he never could. She had written it the night he raised his voice one final time, the night she packed a bag, walked out the front door, and kept walking. Dear Daddy, I saw you cry last night. I didn't tell anyone. I think it's a secret. But I just wanted you to know, I heard. I still love you. She had signed it with a heart and a misspelled name, Rachel. He'd kept it all these years, folded, reread, held like a lifeline when the world felt too far gone. He never mailed a reply, but he made beans every Sunday. Rachel realized that now, somewhere in his own way. Every bowl had been a kind of apology, a memory he could still cook, even if he couldn't speak it. She reached out and touched the edge of the letter, as if it might disappear. It was never about the chair, she whispered. It was about the kitchen. Walter looked at her, then really looked, and she saw it. The pain, the pride, the apology stuck behind tired eyes. I should have chased you, he said. Rachel smiled, but it was the kind that hurt. I should have waited for you too, she answered. There was no thunder in that moment. No violin soundtrack. Just 2 people finally saying the things that had sat between them like ghosts at a dinner table. And it all began with a bowl of beans. Walter stood, slowly, bones creaking like floorboards in an old house. He walked to a cupboard, opened it, and pulled down a shoebox. Inside were things Rachel hadn't seen since she was a child. A photo of her first-grade play, a hair tie she lost the day her mother left, and at the bottom, a hospital bracelet. Hers, from the day she was born. I didn't forget you, he said, almost to himself. I just didn't know how to carry both the pain and the pride at the same time. Rachel ran a hand through her hair, swallowed back something sharp in her throat. You don't have to anymore, she said. The lights flickered slightly, as if even the house was adjusting to the new weight being lifted. Tomorrow, Rachel would stand in front of cameras, reporters, and people with opinions they hadn't earned. They would call her outsider, troublemaker, hero, fraud. They'd twist her silence into strategy and her strength into ambition. But they wouldn't know what happened here tonight. How a bowl of beans and an unsent letter cracked open 30 years of silence. How forgiveness didn't arrive like a speech, but like a shared meal in a dimly lit kitchen. How sometimes the most radical thing 2 people can do is stay in the same room long enough for the past to loosen its grip. Rachel stood, picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and slid it into her purse. She didn't need it anymore, but she wasn't letting it go. Walter rinsed the bowls, slow and methodical, like someone doing penance, 1 dish at a time. As Rachel stepped outside, she turned back one last time. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He nodded. Every day, she smiled. Me too. And for the first time in a long time, they laughed. It was small, brief, but real. And in a town where so much had been built on secrets and silence, that laughter was the loudest truth either of them had ever spoken. But Oak Ridge hadn't heard the last of them, because come sunrise, that truth was about to walk into the town hall and sit in the front row, and with it, the reckoning this town had spent years pretending would never come. Next, you'll see what happens when one letter meets 100 voices, and how a quiet man with a forgotten past becomes the most powerful witness of all. The next morning, before the town opened its eyes, Walter was already in the backyard, shirt half-buttoned, pants dusty. kneeling by a patch of stubborn earth he hadn't touched in years. He wasn't a gardener, never was. But today, he was. Planting something. It was a small banana shoot, hardly more than a stem with curled green at the top. He'd found it behind the trailer, growing wild near the fence line, half choked in weeds. Most folks would have yanked it out and tossed it in the trash. But not Walter. Not this one. Because that little sprout came from a tree his late wife had planted nearly 40 years ago. Back when the soil was soft, and Rachel was still learning how to walk. Back then, they used to joke about it. Who plants bananas in Tennessee? She would laugh, and his wife would wink and say, who says you can't grow sweet things in hard places? Now, with fingers cracked and calloused, Walter dug slow, careful, respectful, not just for the roots, but for what they meant. He wasn't trying to fix the yard. He was trying to fix something older, because somewhere deep in him, beneath all the regret, was a truth he hadn't let himself feel. It wasn't too late to nurture what he once neglected. Rachel watched from the porch. She didn't say a word, just held a mug of lukewarm coffee and let the scene unfold like a photograph developing in real time. This was not the man who yelled at her, not the man who chose beer over bedtime stories. This was someone else. Someone trying, quietly, without expecting applause. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not grand gestures, not social media posts. Just a man digging in the dirt, where something once grew. Walter sat back on his heels, wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his shirt, and looked up at the tree line. The sky was still gray, but lighter now. Like it, too, was trying to make peace with the day. Do you think it'll grow? He asked without turning. Rachel stepped down from the porch and walked over, crouched beside him. It already is, she said. They didn't hug, they didn't cry. They just stayed there for a while, side by side. Both a little older, both a little humbler, watching over a piece of earth they were finally ready to tend. And that single act, a man planting hope in his own backyard, carried more power than any speech he could have given at town hall. Because Oak Ridge didn't need a man with a microphone. It needed a man who knew how to kneel. That afternoon, word got around that Rachel had submitted a request to speak at the public hearing. Some rolled their eyes. Others braced for spectacle. A few prayed someone would cancel the whole thing before it made national news. But no one could stop it now. Not the mayor, not the sheriff, not the press team behind their windows and drafts and edits. Because in 24 hours, Walter Henderson, the man they once ignored, laughed at, pushed aside, was going to sit in the front row, with dirt still under his fingernails. And behind him, a town would have to decide, do we keep pretending this soil is dead? Or do we finally admit it still remembers how to grow something good? Next, we step into the courthouse, into a room where the air will be thick. The cameras will roll, and the voices that were once silent will rise, not in rage, but in remembrance. And at the center of it all, a father, a daughter, and the town that finally has to look them both in the eye. Names hold weight, not because of how they sound, but because of what they carry, where they've been, what they've been through, and whether the people who bear them are running from them, or finally coming home to them. Rachel stood alone in her motel room that morning, staring at the names stitched onto her son's baby blanket. Eli Walter Grant. 3 names, each one chosen like a confession. Eli, for the strength she hoped he'd grow into. Grant, because it was hers, the name she built, the name she protected, the name she never let anyone in Oak Ridge know about. And Walter, for the man she never stopped missing, even when she swore she'd forgotten him. She hadn't told her father yet that he had a grandson, that she whispered his name into a hospital room at dawn, that when the nurse asked what middle name to use, she didn't hesitate, because something in her knew, deep down, she'd never really erased him, only buried him under ambition, distance, and silence. She folded the blanket carefully, placed it into her bag, and exhaled the kind of breath you only take when you know everything is about to change. Downtown, the courthouse buzzed with low murmurs and restless shoes on linoleum floors. The town hadn't seen a crowd like this since the high school state championship back in '89. But this wasn't about trophies. This was about truth. People came early, some for gossip, some for guilt, a few, just because their conscience wouldn't let them stay home. The room filled with former classmates, old church members, retired factory workers, all with eyes half curious, half ashamed. And then Rachel walked in. Not in designer heels, not in a sharp suit, just a plain navy dress and a bracelet her mother used to wear on Sundays. Walter was already there, front row, flannel shirt tucked in, hair combed with care. He didn't turn around when she entered. Didn't need to. He felt her in the room, like warmth returning to a place that had forgotten how to be held. When the floor opened for public statements, a few spoke first. Cautiously. One man defended the officer. Another woman questioned the video. But it wasn't until Rachel stood up that the room went still, like wind pulling back before a storm. She walked to the podium slowly, placed her hands on either side, like she was bracing for the truth to come rushing out. "My name is Rachel Grant," she said, voice calm, clear, unshaken. But it wasn't always. A pause, one heartbeat long. "My full name is Rachel Henderson, daughter of Walter Henderson, born right here in Oak Ridge." Murmurs. Heads turned, mouths opened. But Rachel didn't flinch. "For years, I thought I had to outrun this name to become someone. I thought leaving meant freedom. But lately, I've learned something harder, something deeper. You don't heal by erasing where you come from. You heal by reclaiming it." She pulled the baby blanket from her bag, held it up gently. "This is my son's. He was born 6 months ago. His name is Eli Walter Grant. That middle name. It wasn't chosen lightly." Now even the mayor looked down. Rachel turned to her father, met his eyes. "I gave him your name, Dad. Not because you were perfect, but because you're still here. You stood back up. You're trying." Walter's face didn't move, but his hand clenched the bench so tightly his knuckles went white. "I came here not to shame anyone," she continued, "but to remind you, and myself, that names don't have to stay broken. They can be mended, not by courts or committees, but by us." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent, because Oak Ridge, a town built on old names, old grudges, old stories, had just heard something new. Not a scandal, not a defense. A daughter naming her son after a man the world tried to forget, and in doing so, making the whole town remember. Rachel stepped back from the mic, folded the blanket, and returned to her seat. No applause, no gasps. Just quiet. Heavy, real. The kind of quiet that comes when something long buried finally sees daylight. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in policy, not in politics, but in hearts. Because names, when spoken with love, carry power. The power to rebuild, the power to remind, and most of all, the power to return home. What comes next isn't loud. It's not flashy, but it's honest, because in the next chapter, the past comes knocking, not through outrage, but through a single, simple act. A voice raised not in anger, but in truth. And when that voice belongs to the one man nobody expected to speak, that's when the town stops pretending, and starts listening. It started with a ping, then another, and another. By the time noon hit, the town's group chats, mom circles, and back-channel school boards were all sharing the same thing. A high-definition clip 38 seconds long, with crystal-clear audio, not just the shaky video from the gas station. Camera. This was different. It had sound. The crack of the officer's boot, the groan from Walter as he hit the ground, and just at the end a woman's voice. "You don't have the right to do that." That voice, calm and unwavering, became the match. Because truth, once whispered, doesn't stay small forever. Someone had been filming from the bakery across the street. A teen working his first summer job. He didn't mean to catch it. He was just making a Snapchat story, showing the muffins. But when the officer raised his leg, the kid's phone didn't blink. He kept filming. And yesterday, when his grandma saw Rachel speak at the town hall, she asked him, "Don't you have a video of that old man?" He hesitated. Then he showed her. She uploaded it, not to TikTok, not to Facebook, but to her church group newsletter, which, as it turns out, had over 2,000 subscribers. From there, it spread like a confession at revival. People didn't just watch it, they heard it, and that changed everything. Because now it wasn't hearsay. Now, it wasn't rumor. Now, Oak Ridge had to look and listen to what it had let happen. Local media picked it up within hours. A journalist from Nashville drove down that evening. By morning, the footage was playing on breakfast TVs across Tennessee. And just like that, the town that had always prided itself on keeping its business quiet, found itself in the center of a conversation louder than anyone was ready for. Some people defended the officer, claimed it was edited, said Walter had lunged first, but the video didn't lie. Neither did the bruises, and neither did the silence of a man who'd spent most of his life being talked about, finally being talked to. Walter didn't say much that day. He sat on the porch, watching clouds roll in, the kind that comes slow and heavy. No thunder, just the kind of gray that soaks deep. Rachel sat beside him, her phone lighting up every 5 minutes. Reporters, advocates, lawyers, strangers. One message caught her eye. It was from a name she hadn't seen in decades. Mrs. Langford, her third-grade teacher. It simply said, "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you then. I'm standing up now." Rachel passed the phone to her father. He read the message twice, then looked up. "You know," he said, voice dry but steady, "I always thought the past was like a shed full of junk. You keep the door locked, throw the key somewhere, and just let it rot." She waited. "But I think I was wrong," he continued. "The past don't rot, it waits. And if you leave it too long, it grows teeth." Rachel nodded. "So what do we do?" Walter looked out at the lawn, then down at his hands. "We open the door. We name what's inside. And we tell folks, this is what it looked like. This is what it felt like." Not just for him, for everyone who had ever been silenced in that town, pushed aside, ignored, punished for being poor, or too loud, or too different. And that's when Walter made his decision. He was going to speak, not for revenge, but because if the past was coming anyway, it might as well come with witnesses. The kind that remembered, the kind that forgave, the kind that never stopped, hoping the town could do better. The next day, a special session was called. Cameras were allowed. The mayor looked pale. The sheriff sat stiff. A local news anchor fixed her mic 3 times. And then Walter walked in. No lawyer, no speechwriter, just his old flannel, his steady breath, and the letter, the same one Rachel had written as a child, now unfolded on the podium. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shake his fist. He just read her words. Word for word, the ones she wrote when she was small and scared, and still believed her father could come back to her. "Dear Daddy, I still love you." When he finished, the room was quiet, no thunder, no applause, just the sound of people learning, maybe for the first time, that the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard. And Oak Ridge, for once, it listened. What happens next is not about a courtroom or a headline. It's about what a town chooses to do when it finally stops pretending the past can be buried, and starts asking who's brave enough to plant something new in its place. Because in the next chapter, it's not just one man or one woman standing up. It, SA town, deciding whether it's ready to stand with them. No. One remembered the last time the town hall was full. Maybe for the mayor's re-election in 2004. Maybe during the flood scare. But never like this. This time they didn't come for politics. They came for something else. Something that had been rattling under their ribs for years. Too soft to name. Too loud to ignore. The room filled early. Folks who hadn't spoken to each other in years. Sat shoulder to shoulder. People who once crossed the street to avoid Walter Henderson now waited in line behind him, clutching notes, photos, and half-swallowed apologies. No one asked where Rachel was. They knew she'd come, and when she entered, carrying nothing but a folded letter and her mother's bracelet, the room didn't erupt. It hushed. Because even towns with hardened hearts recognize when something holy walks in. She didn't sit. Not yet. She stood near the back, next to Walter, both watching the front as the council adjusted. Microphones and sipped from trembling water bottles. The mayor called the meeting to order. But it was the people who led it. First came Mrs. Simmons, retired schoolteacher, voiced soft but steady. "I saw the video. I heard the groan. And I remembered when Walter came to school to pick Rachel up early because she was too ashamed to stay after the bullying. I didn't say anything back then. I am now." Then came Carl, the fishmonger. "I used to yell at Walter for blocking my stall with his cart. Didn't even think he couldn't afford a booth of his own. I looked away too long. I'm not doing it again." And one by one, like rain tapping gently on a roof long dry, they spoke. Not loud, not angry, just honest. They didn't all defend Walter, but they all confronted the truth. The truth that this town had looked the other way. That dignity wasn't just stripped by a single kick. It was worn down by years of indifference. Then Rachel stepped forward. Not as a businesswoman, not as the mystery woman in white, just as a daughter. She didn't read a new speech. She read the same letter, the same words she once wrote with a crayon gripped too tight in a house that never felt safe enough to cry in. And when she finished, Walter stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward. He didn't need to say anything this time. The town already knew. The mayor tried to close the session, but an old woman in the back rose with a cane and said, "You don't end this. We do." And with that, something cracked. Not in the walls, but in the people. Neighbors turned to each other. Stories spilled out. The baker who once refused Walter credit offered him a tab, publicly. A pastor who preached forgiveness but hadn't practiced it asked for prayer, out loud, for himself. And just like that, Oakridge began to shift. Not from shame, but from ownership. This wasn't about canceling or correcting. It was about waking up to what they'd allowed to, who they'd forgotten, and to who they could still become. Walter didn't ask for justice, Rachel didn't demand change. But by simply showing up together, they gave the town a mirror. And for once, the town didn't flinch. Because the hardest thing to do isn't to face what you've broken. It's to believe it's still worth fixing. As the room emptied, and the sun dropped behind the pines, Rachel placed a hand on her father's shoulder. "They heard you," she whispered. He nodded once. "They heard you." And as they stepped out into the warm hush of evening, neither knew exactly what would come next. But both knew this: the town had finally awakened. And with roots deep enough, even the oldest trees can bloom again. In the next chapter, one small act, a walk to the market, will carry more weight than any speech. Because healing isn't finished in public halls. It's finished in the quiet, ordinary steps of people choosing to see each other again. One sidewalk at a time. No one expected him to move that fast, not at his age. Not with ribs still bruised, knees stiff from decades of hard work, and harder silence. But when the officer lunged, the same one who had kicked him just days before, now red-faced and reckless, from the shame of exposure, Walter moved. It wasn't rage that propelled him. It wasn't pride. It was something older, more instinctive, more sacred. The moment Rachel stepped toward the podium to speak again, this time not for the letter, not for the cameras, but to ask the council for a motion on policy, the former officer, standing in the back under false pretenses, snapped. Maybe it was ego, maybe it was fear, or maybe he simply couldn't stand the sight of someone he'd once silenced, now standing taller than him. He shoved through the aisle. No badge, no uniform, just a man unraveling in plain view. Rachel barely turned in time, but Walter did. He stepped forward, not between her and the chaos, but into it. No hesitation, just two hands raised, a chest wide open, and a voice that cut through the room like gospel. "You'll go through me first." Everything froze. The officer halted mid-step, breathing heavy, fists tight. Walter didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't raise his own fists, just stood, tall, unshaking. It was the first time anyone in that room had seen him like that. Not hunched, not tired, but whole. Rachel reached out slowly, touching her father's back, grounding him, and maybe grounding herself. Security arrived seconds later. But they weren't needed. Because what stopped the officer wasn't fear of the law. It was the weight of being seen. By the same man he had once humiliated, now choosing not to retaliate, but to protect. That's what broke him. The moment didn't end with handcuffs or shouting. It ended with the officer stepping back, chest heaving, eyes confused, like someone just pulled a mirror to his face. And he didn't like what he saw, was quietly escorted out. No resistance. The room exhaled. And Walter, the man who once ran from every kind of pain, turned to his daughter. "I wasn't there when I should have been," he whispered, "but I'm here now." Rachel didn't say anything. She just nodded, tears brimming, not from fear, not from anger, but from something deeper. Safety. Not the kind you find behind locks or money. The kind that only shows up when the person who broke your heart finally decides to stand in front of it. Later that night, people would talk. Some would say he was brave, others foolish. But everyone would remember that image. A broken man, standing like a shield. Not to fight, but to say no more. And that moment, brief as it was, rippled through the town, louder than any news headline ever could. Because nothing speaks louder than a father who finally understands what it means to protect. In the next chapter, that image of a daughter behind her father, and a father standing still, unshaken, will ripple through porches, classrooms, barbershops, and diner booths. And it will lead to something no one saw coming. Not just reconciliation, but belonging. The kind that shows up when a community doesn't just forgive, it remembers together. Forgiveness doesn't shout. It doesn't come with confetti, or speeches, or church choirs rising in unison. It arrives quieter than most expect. Like a chair being pulled out at the kitchen table. Like a breath someone's been holding finally released. That night, long after the hearing ended and the sun dropped behind the oak trees of Oakridge, Walter sat on his porch, alone. No cameras, no crowds, just him. The hum of cicadas, and the letter, Rachel, had left it again, neatly folded beside his coffee mug. Same words, same crayon-scrawled truth. But this time, she added one sentence at the bottom, written in her own handwriting, as a woman. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. He read that line again and again, each time softer, as if letting it seep into places that had been locked up too long. He wasn't a man of grand emotion. Never had been. But that night, for the first time in 3 decades, he let something out. Not a sob, not even a tear, just a sound. A long, low exhale. The kind that only escapes when the weight you've carried finally feels shared. The next morning, Rachel came back. Not to talk, not to plan, just to sit. She brought coffee. He brought toast. They didn't say much. But at one point, as a bird landed on the porch rail, Walter turned to her and said, I heard you say my name up there, at the meeting. Rachel looked at him, unsure of what he meant. I ain't heard my name said like that in years, he continued, like it mattered, like it still had some good in it. Rachel smiled, not with her lips, but with her whole face. You always had good in it, she said. I just stopped listening for it. Walter nodded slowly, almost like a bow dot, and then, just above a whisper, came the words she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. I'm sorry, no qualifications, no defenses. Just that it didn't fix everything. But it didn't have to, because forgiveness isn't the erasing of wounds. It's the choosing, over and over, to tend to the scar, instead of pretending it was never there. Later that day, neighbors stopped by, not with judgment, but with peach cobbler and folded chairs. A few kids rode their bikes up the gravel path, waved shyly, and called out, Hey, Mr. Walter. He waved back, not stiff, not ashamed, like someone waking from a long, hard dream. Rachel watched it all from the side, her father becoming known again, not for the man he used to be, but for the one he was finally letting himself become. And there, on that old porch in the heat of a southern afternoon, surrounded by the ordinary holiness of coffee cups and second chances, forgiveness made a sound, not loud, but real. The sound of an old man chuckling as a child handed him a drawing. The sound of a daughter saying Dad without flinching. The sound of a screen door creaking open and staying open. And in towns like Oak Ridge, where so much of life is passed down through whispers and memory, that sound travels far, because the story wasn't just theirs anymore. It was everyone's. In the next chapter, that forgiveness, quiet and unfinished, will reach beyond the porch, into Sunday services, into school halls, into the very heart of a town ready not just to change policies, but to change how it remembers, because forgiveness is a seed, and once planted, it keeps finding ways to grow. It started with the smell, that familiar, slow-cooked warmth drifting from the kitchen like a memory someone forgot to close the door on. Sweet butter beans, simmered with smoked ham and a touch of brown sugar, the exact way Rachel remembered them from when she was 8. But Walter was stirring the pot again. This time, not alone. Rachel stood beside him at the stove, sleeves rolled, tasting as she went. They didn't talk much. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It had changed shape. It was now the kind of quiet shared by people who had run out of anger but still had love left. The kitchen table, once a battleground of shouted words and slammed fists, now held 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and a new kind of history. Outside the porch was full. Kids from the neighborhood were gathered on the steps, bikes laid on their sides like loyal dogs. One boy, no older than 10, poked his head through the screen door. Mr. Walter, you got more of them beans? Walter chuckled, the sound creaky, but real. He waved the boy in. Grab a bowl, honey. I made a whole pot. Another kid followed, then another. Within minutes, a crowd had formed, not noisy, not rowdy, just hungry, not just for food, but for something else, for a place that felt safe. For a person who saw them. Rachel began, setting out paper bowls. Walter ladled, steady hands now at home in a kitchen that had once gone too quiet for too long. One little girl, curly-haired and wide-eyed, looked up at Walter with the kind of curiosity only children carry. Are you the man from the video? Walter froze for half a second. Then he smiled, soft, full of something gentle. I reckon I am. She nodded. My mama said you were real brave. Walter looked out the window for a moment, then back down. I wasn't always. But I'm trying. Rachel caught the exchange and felt something loosen in her chest, because here it was. Not a press conference, not a town hall speech, just a bowl of beans, passed from hand to hand, and with it, the start of something deeper than forgiveness, restoration. This was what healing looked like in Oak Ridge. Not flashy, not fast, but honest. A girl offering to help wash dishes. A boy asking if he could come back tomorrow. Walter wiping his hands on an apron and asking Rachel if they should make peach cobbler next. Sunday. The wound wasn't gone, but it had stopped bleeding. Because when people eat together, something shifts. The kitchen becomes sacred, the meal becomes memory, and the act of feeding becomes a quiet kind of redemption. For Walter, this was more than a second chance. It was the first time he truly felt worthy of one. And for Rachel, watching her father laugh with children who saw him not as broken, but as whole, it was the moment she finally let go of the weight she'd carried since the night she left. That evening, after the dishes were done and the porch had emptied, Walter sat back down at the table and looked at Rachel. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. Rachel leaned her head against the doorframe, smiling. "No, but I always hoped." And that was enough. Because hope, when fed, when shared, when served in something as simple as a bowl of beans, has a way of turning wounds into stories, and stories into strength. Tomorrow, the town would gather again, not in courtrooms or crisis, but in celebration. And standing at the center would be the man who once stood alone. Only this time, he wouldn't be standing for survival. He'd be standing for something far greater, belonging. In the final chapter, we'll walk with Walter and Rachel to the very place where this story began, the market square. Only this time, it won't be a place of shame but of honor. And in that walk, we'll see what truly changes when a town chooses to remember not what broke them, but what brought them back together. The banners were simple, white cotton, with blue hand letters fluttering gently above the market square. Oak Ridge Harvest Day. No sponsors, no speeches, just folding tables, handmade signs, and the kind of music you can only hear from old porch speakers, and folks who still know how to play the fiddle without reading a single note. It looked like any small-town fair. Sweet tea sweating in plastic cups, peach pies lined up for judging, and kids darting between booths with sticky hands and wild grins. But something was different this year. This wasn't just a harvest festival, it was a homecoming. Not for someone famous or someone new, but for someone the town had once cast aside. Walter Henderson stood near the produce stall, a volunteer tag pinned crookedly to his flannel shirt. He was helping direct foot traffic, guiding cars, and passing out bean samples from a crock pot he'd brought from home. Most people smiled. Some paused, not knowing exactly what to say. But the ones who mattered looked him in the eye, not with pity, but with respect. Because they remembered. Not the kick, not the scandal. They remembered how he stood in front of his daughter. How he read that letter aloud. How he made space for the truth to sit down, even when it hurt. And in a town like Oak Ridge, that kind of honesty doesn't fade. It reshapes everything. That day, Walter was officially appointed to lead the neighborhood committee. Not because he asked, but because the community voted. A quiet nomination from the floor. A raised hand, a second, and then a unanimous nod. They didn't give him power. They gave him trust. Rachel watched from a few steps back, arms crossed, smile tucked into the corner of her mouth, like she wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. She didn't need a title. She didn't want applause. She just wanted to see her father chosen, not out of guilt, but out of genuine belief that he had something worth offering. The same man once shamed on that very pavement. Now being asked to serve on it, it didn't undo the past, but it gave the future a better foundation. Because that's what rebuilding really is. Not starting over, but choosing to build differently this time. Choosing stone over facade, conversation over silence, truth, even when it trembles. Later that afternoon, as the pies were judged and the sky burned orange with sunset, Walter stepped up to the mic for a short closing thank you. No notes, just his voice. He cleared his throat, tapped the mic once old habit, and looked out over the crowd. "I don't have a lot to say," he began. "You'll know most of my story by now. Some of it's ugly, some of it's hard. But I'll tell you this, I ain't the only one who's been hurt in this town. And I sure ain't the only one who's made mistakes." He paused. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't change the past, but you can choose what kind of future walks in your name." He looked at Rachel then. She nodded, tears quietly slipping down her cheek, catching the last of the sunlight. Walter smiled. "And I'd rather leave behind a name that stood for truth. Even if it came late, than keep one that looked clean but never got used right." The crowd clapped, not out of politeness, but out of knowing. Because Oak Ridge had heard enough lies in its lifetime. Now it wanted truth. Even if it was messy. Especially because it was messy. As the festival wrapped, Rachel took her father's arm. Together, they walked through the square, past booths and banners and old scars painted over with the color of second chances. They didn't need to say it out loud, but both of them knew this wasn't the same town anymore, and neither were they in the next and final chapter. We return to where everything once fell apart, the market path. But this time, with every step forward, you'll see what redemption really looks like. Not just for a man and his daughter, but for a whole town learning how to walk again, together. The morning was soft, that kind of stillness that only happens in small towns before the world stirs, when the dew still clings to porch rails and birds sing not to impress, but to remember. Walter laced his boots like he had every morning since. His knees started complaining, slow, careful, deliberate. This time, though, his hands didn't shake, his breath didn't catch, because today, he was walking back to the place where everything had broken. But not to relive it, to rewrite it. Rachel waited outside, coffee in hand, dressed simple, just like him. They didn't speak much, they didn't need to. Some journeys don't start with words. They start with silence you're no longer afraid to share. The road to the market wasn't long, but it held years inside it. Each step they took past a version of themselves, younger, angrier, more afraid. And yet each step also felt lighter, not because the road had changed, but because they had. People saw them, waved, honked gently. A few even clapped. It wasn't fanfare, it was acknowledgement. They reached the corner where it had all happened. Same cracked pavement, same crooked lamppost, but the energy had shifted. A new bench had been installed near the vendor stalls, small, wooden, clean. A plaque above it read, "For those who stood back up." Walter smiled when he saw it. Not with pride, but with peace. He turned to Rachel. "You know, I never thought I'd walk back here without feeling shame." She touched his arm, gently. "You're not walking back, Dad. You're walking forward." He looked at the people around the market, the kids waving from the pie stand, the fishmonger nodding respectfully, the teenage boy who once filmed the video, now working the register with a quiet sense of purpose. This was the same market, but it wasn't the same moment. They stepped past the fruit stand, past the spot where he once fell, and something unexpected happened. A woman, older, kind eyes, strong shoulders, stepped out from behind a flower booth. She held out a small, potted plant. "I figured you'd want this," she said, handing it to Walter. He looked down. It was a baby banana tree. He laughed, a full, open laugh that echoed down the row of stalls. "I think I've got just the right patch of dirt for it," he said. Rachel smiled, eyes bright. Because healing doesn't always come in speeches or courtrooms. Sometimes it walks on worn-out boots. Sometimes it grows in small pots. And sometimes it simply looks like a man returning to the place where he once lost everything, and realizing he didn't come back alone. Walter and Rachel found an open seat near the coffee truck. Nothing fancy, just a bench in the sun, backs straight, eyes open. A young girl walked past with her mother, tugging her sleeve. "Is that the man from the story?" she whispered. The mother knelt beside her. "No, baby," she said gently. "That's the man who changed it." And that was the truth. Because Oak Ridge hadn't been transformed by justice, delivered from above, it had been mended from within. One name reclaimed, one meal shared, one truth spoken at a time. As they sat sipping coffee, Rachel looked over at her father, skin weathered, spirit steady, and saw not the man who had failed her, but the one who'd found his way back. And for the first time since she was a child, she rested. The walk to the market wasn't just a return. It was a reminder that no place is too far gone, and no person is too broken to become someone new, someone better, when they finally decide to take the first step. The story may end here, but its echo will live on. In quiet mornings, in home-cooked meals, and in every town where someone dares to stop running and simply turn back around.